This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
We want families to come here and gain insightful strategies that empower them to successfully teach diverse learners at home.
Hosted by founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, Peggy Ployer.
Our goal is that these powerful weekly conversations will boost your confidence to cultivate the best at-home learning environment for your student.
For more homeschool resources, go to spedhomeschool.com. You're listening to Empowering Homeschool Conversations with Peggy Ployer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about simple solutions for challenging child behavior. And my guest today is Lauren Spigelmyer, and she is an experienced educator, the executive director of the Behavior Hub, and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in neurobiology and trauma-informed educational approaches. Her passion for children and whole health inspired her to open the Behavior Hub, a nonprofit with the goal of teaching people how to communicate and connect with each other and children in a more dignifying way. Welcome, Lauren. Glad to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've been discussing this whole month behavior in a variety of different contexts, like sleep, which affects behavior, and learning struggles, just a variety of different approaches. But there are those challenges that we don't even know where they even stem from or even how to approach them. And so I love that this is our final conversation of the month, and just those challenges. And we've had some parents send in questions ahead of time, but just know, if you are watching live with us, that we would love for you to be part of the conversation as well. So if you have challenging behavior and you're like, I don't exactly know how to approach this, we would love to include that in our conversation today, so that you can walk away just from this hour with some strategies that you can use. And we love that we have our guests on live, so that you can get that help, because I know a lot of you have some real struggles in even getting out of your homes and going to various places. And so we want to bring this information directly to you. So Lauren, I always love to start out my shows and asking my guests about why they're so passionate about the topic that we are discussing, and usually that is what spurs you on to do the work that you do. So I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. Happy to share. So the work of the Behavior Hub, and then even the work at Penn, came from like the very first year in the classroom. Had quite a few students who identified as emotional support students. I had some gifted students. I had a class 25 students, third grade, just a range of needs. And what I was seeing is that there were some behaviors that came with some of these labels, and I expected them. I was very young. I didn't quite know how to respond to them as first year in teaching, but I knew that how the district and the building was responding to them was something that I didn't align with. So when there was a misbehavior, and I would ask for the support of the office or whoever I needed to ask for support from, the result was just to pull the child out of the class and go sit him or her in the principal's office. And I thought, well, that's not really very helpful. And then the like secondary follow-up would be like, okay, we'll dismiss them from school. They'll be suspended, whatever it may be. And I kept seeing that across the next couple of years of like, students are pulled out. There's like no educational or remedial work. Then they're suspended. And just like it was a repeating pattern. I thought that doesn't work for me. Like that just doesn't align with my values and what I feel about kids. And because I knew, even at that young age, that behaviors, there was something under it. They were communicating something, but it wasn't just a malicious choice to not listen and not behave, because that was disruptive to like their bonds in the classroom, which we all want to keep. We want friendships. We want a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
So if we were intentionally doing that, which they weren't, that would disrupt that. So I started to dig a little bit deeper. I started to read, research, take courses, talk to people. And that led me to understanding behavior from a whole new lens and kind of what's under behavior, and then what to do in response, which led me to, I got to tell more people about this.
Right. Absolutely. It's amazing how, just episodes like that or events in our lives that are just like those pivotal places and when you come to this realization when you don't have what you need and you find it, it's like, I got to
Yeah.
tell everybody about this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's amazing, because I'm sure that you work with educators now on a regular basis who are in that same spot and are able
100%.
to come to you now for that information. And I love that you're sharing this with our homeschool community too, because a lot of parents like myself fell into this education profession, as you
Yep.
can say, I did for 19 years, not by choice, but it was because my child got basically kicked out of school.
Yep.
And, we wanted better outcomes for them,
Mhm.
just don't have the equipment or the
Yep.
training
Yep.
to do that. So thank you. And that's an awesome place to come from. And that you actually listened to that internal voice that was saying,
Yeah.
"This is not right."
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so many people that don't. I mean, they're just like, "Well, this is what the school's telling me to do," or
Mhm.
"This is what they say, the experts
Mhm.
say will
Yep.
work."
Yep.
And yet, yeah, a lot of those kids become statistics, which
Yeah.
we don't want to see. So
Correct.
very cool. So we talked kind of a little bit. Um, Ahead of the show about
Mhm.
just some different topics.
Yep.
And I is would love to kind of kick off with talking a little bit about emotional regulation and just
Okay.
what is that, um, and how do you know if a child is struggling in this area, and then maybe some ways that parents can help a child to better regulate their emotions. And I
Yeah.
know that's a lot,
Nope.
but just whatever comes to mind as things that you feel like parents should know.
Yep. That makes perfect sense. I usually run everyone through like a 4-step process. Like there are 4 steps basically to this emotional regulation. If you can get these 4 steps, you're golden. You're not only going to teach yourself and your child to better emotionally regulate, but you're going to prevent emotional outbursts from happening at the same time, as long as you don't forget the 4th step.
Right.
So the first step is relatively simple. It's just in order to change our emotional state, we have to recognize that we are not in an emotional state we want to be in. So what I typically recommend is a bit of like categorization system. I try to gear my work a lot towards younger kids, like 2 to 8, and then I just modify it up for tweens and teens. So in working with younger kiddos, a categorization system might look like it's usually like a 4-part like continuum.
Okay.
So like I often use colored zones. So there's a
Oh,
blue zone,
yes.
then a green zone, then a yellow zone, then a red zone. And each zone represents a series of emotions. So if you're blue, you're like you're down on energy, you're low, you're tired, you're sick, you're sad.
Hmm.
In the green, you're optimal functioning, you're focused, you're happy. And you move into the yellow. The yellow is like I'm getting agitated or frustrated, or maybe I'm even getting like too excited. My energy is kind of
Right.
going up. And then
Hmm.
red is like, all right, now I'm kind of gone. Like
Right.
anger, it's aggression, it's like beyond just a little bit of frustration, or it's like too extreme excitement.
Hmm.
So typically we go through like a continuum of like those 4 emotions. And the thing I teach is like that's normal and okay. Like even as adults, we go through those 4 colored
Right.
zones.
That's good
You're
to,
not
yeah,
wrong or
convey.
bad to
Hmm.
be in blue or yellow or red. Like you're not a bad kid because you land in the yellow or the
Right.
red. I go into the yellow or the red. The
Hmm.
purpose of this chart is not to tell you you are bad because you are here. The purpose of this chart is to help you see you have left the green zone. And anytime you leave the green zone, whether you go up in energy into that yellow or red, or you go down in energy to the blue, we need to do something to bring us back to the green. It's basically, in a
Yeah.
nutshell, it's like nervous system reset, nervous system regulation. Like recognize when you leave your happy zone, implement, do, use something to come back into the green. And also
Absolutely.
simultaneously do things to prevent yourself from ever leaving the green. Do some strategies to keep yourself in the green so you don't ever have to
Yes.
leave it.
Right. Yeah, that's so important. And that those are definitely things that even a child with a low cognitive abilities can be taught how
Yeah,
to express
yeah,
that, where they're at in that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you were just modified for teens, you would just change out maybe not colors, but something else that relates to them better that has 4 different categories because you're basically going to go through those 4 stages or 4 zones of emotion. So if you get that foundation,
Mhm.
that's where you can start to begin to recognize that your emotional state is not where you want it to be, and not like an optimal functioning. You leave logic and your emotions take over. So that's step one, recognize kind of where you fall on this continuum.
Right.
And then my step two is usually somewhat of an optional step. Is like
Mhm.
sometimes in the energy of the moment, like in the space, like if we're talking like in a home setting, like wherever schoolwork is done or in school, like in a classroom, sometimes it's
Yeah.
hard to regulate in that moment because the energy is so high. It's like you're in it.
Right.
So what I recommend is creating a space in the home or the classroom or both that is like a chill space, a calm zone, a meditation
Ah,
space.
yes.
I have one as
Mhm.
an adult. I have a chair that's like near the window that has plants. There's a candle. So like a space that you can go to both reactively and preventatively to kind of reset because it
Mhm.
removes you from the energy of the moment. You like physically to leave the space and come back.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a helpful tool. It's not like a consequence. It's not like timeout, like go sit in timeout. It's very different. This is not something I force kids to do. I
Right.
just give it to them as a tool. Like if you're feeling like you can't chill out here, you have the option to go in this space, and that might make you feel better because that space feels better. And then you can come
Right.
back when
Yep.
you're ready.
We had a whole episode on how to create a calm down
Yeah,
corner or
exactly.
space, and
And
so
and some
yeah,
kids won't need it. Like
they
some
do.
can
Yep.
regulate
Mhm.
in the moment on the spot. So that's why I say that's number 2 is a little bit optional because it's
Mhm.
dependent on your own child.
Right.
But then step 3 is a big one is, okay, we recognize that we've left the green zone if we're talking in colors. What do we do to get back? And
Yeah.
that's where it's like it's not always clear because what works for one child might not work for another. So if you're in that yellow or red zone, your energy is kind of up. So you might want to do something to bring energy back down.
Mhm.
Versus if you're down in the blue zone, your energy is kind of down. You might need to do something to bring it back up. So you would
Right.
use very
So different
different strategies
strategies.
for both ends of
Yeah.
the spectrum. And some kids will need like multiple exposures or repetitions to a strategy to come down. Some just need one exposure. Sometimes what worked on Monday doesn't work on Friday. So
Right.
I encourage everyone to create like a toolbox, like have a toolbox of things that
Oh,
you can use for yellow and red and things that you can use for blue, because even individuals who are more prone to go up in energy can still go down in energy.
right.
So if you have tools for both sides of the spectrum, then you can use them. And if you have multiple tools, one doesn't work, you can pull out another.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, tools for this are it's like unlimited. I mean, if you search coping, calming strategies, you'll see hundreds of options. And some of the more obvious, familiar ones are probably any type of breath work. Like long, slow,
Yes.
deep breaths are going to bring your energy back down. If your energy's
Mhm.
low, you do kind of short, quick, fast breathing, that will bring you back up. Um, there's like the integration of like body movement. So it could be like
Yeah.
whether that's like walking or running or, biking, that's like rhythmic movement can be really regulating, swinging, all of those
Mhm.
things are regulating, but it could also be, like stretching or like
Ah,
integration of
yes.
yoga, 'cause you're
Mhm.
moving slow to slow yourself back down when you're in too fast or heightened state of energy.
Hmm.
So I just try to think an
Yeah.
opposite, like any type of strategy or
Yep.
intervention that would
Right.
be opposite of the energy that the child is in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you wanna move in the opposite direction. So what do
Mhm.
we do to move? And I
Yeah.
think as a visual, that's probably the best thing because usually your state of mind is a little bit in a panic
Yep,
when your
yep.
child's there, even,
Mhm.
puts you in that almost that same state.
Yeah, it does,
You share
it
it
does.
with them. So having prepared ahead of time, what are we gonna
Yep,
do? So what
yep,
strategies do we have so that you aren't having to think of them on the top of your head? And
yeah. And that's
no.
a good point, is like when a child is in the red zone, their access to logic and reason is gone. Like, that literally,
Right.
they're parts of their brain that they would need to be able to listen, to calm down, or hear a strategy, or use it's gone. So when they're
Right.
that far into the emotional spectrum, at that point, I'm definitely not trying to teach them anything, or
Right.
I'm not
Yes,
trying to
these are
use
things.
language to tell them to calm down. At that
Yeah.
point, I'm myself just modeling what I want them to do. So if I want them to take some big, deep, slow
Yeah.
breaths, I'm just gonna step back. I'm gonna model it. Hopefully they mirror my model. It also calms me down, so it brings my energetic state down.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming these are things you do when you're not in that state, when you're in the green zone,
Correct.
so that they aren't new when you aren't teaching them at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. So you would definitely want to teach the toolbox of tools or create the toolbox of tools when they are in the green zone, because that's when they have the most the most access to logic, reason, rationality, and they can learn these tools and they can store these tools, and then they can be pulled out when they're in the
Mhm.
yellow or the red because they've already learned them. But you definitely can't try and teach them
Right.
when
Yeah.
they're in that elevated state. So yeah, I think that's the preventative work, is like teach them the strategies ahead of time. But also, like, can you schedule breaks in your day where you use some of these strategies when they're already in the green zone? Like, they
Yes.
haven't even left, they're not even
Oh,
showing signs. But can
right.
we schedule breaks like every 15, 20 minutes maybe, or maybe even sooner than that, where we just
Mhm.
utilize breath work so that way we can keep ourselves from even leaving the green.
Yeah. I think that fact of, like, almost circuit training
Yeah,
is what I
yeah,
come back to because
exactly.
I've been doing some rehab lately, and
Mhm.
my the guy that I'm working with asked me, "How do you do this?" And I said, "Well, I put, like, things that I exercise with all around my house." And he's like, "So you created a circuit basically in your house?" I said, "Yes, because it recalls me, oh, I'm supposed to do that whenever I'm in this room or that
Yeah,
room." And I
yeah,
actually do get it done.
yeah,
But you have to be purposeful
you do,
that and
you do.
about getting, those little chunks in because I think we want to like do so much
Mhm,
and our
mhm.
kids don't have the attention span, and that's when we push to those
Yeah,
the extension of those limits, and we kind of push them into those states without even realizing we're doing it because we're trying to just, like, get the checklist done
yeah.
and finish things up.
Like, to further that point is, like, when we push and they leave the green zone and they go into yellow or the red, every time they leave green zone, it is like a muscular system almost. So when they
Mm,
leave the green zone, they go to yellow, they go to red. The yellow and the red zones are getting overworked. They're strengthening, they're growing. So naturally, because they become stronger and the green zone becomes weaker, we get stuck in those, like, yellow or
oh,
red states where it's almost like we just default to them, or we go into them really quickly or really easily because we've exercised the muscles. We've gotten stuck or stayed in those states for long periods of time, or gotten right back into them very quickly because we were pushed, we had tasks we need to get done, and there
right.
was a lot of stress and pressure, and so then, then
So
you
that
get
becomes your constant mode of operation then
yeah,
over time
yeah,
when you train yourself that way. That makes
correct.
so much sense.
So
Yes.
then when you're doing the preventative work and it's not working right away or it's not working every time, it's like, well, yeah, of course, because
Yeah.
those muscles are really strong. Now we're
Mhm.
trying to strengthen the green muscle and we're defaulting naturally back to the yellow and red, and we're going to keep defaulting back until we kind of break that pattern. And it takes a long
Right. It
time to break
does.
the pattern.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. I've just never thought of it with, that emotional regulation so much
Yep.
as with more like body work.
Yep.
And that so much coincides with the nervous system
Oh, 100.
because we were talking ahead of time when I learned
Mhm.
how to reset my vagus nerve. I
Mhm.
remember how I go right back into that fight or flight almost
Yep.
immediately, and
Yep.
now I don't have to do as much work anymore because my body's like, "Oh, this is where I'd rather be." So,
Yep.
and you've trained me how to be here. So, can we
Yep.
talk a little bit about that and that nervous system regulation? How's that
Yeah.
involved with behavior and
Yeah.
and also related to those emotional states?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to try and give you like a visual that's outside of this, like, colored spectrum. So when I teach the nervous system, I teach people there's almost like three boxes on top of each other. And the box in the middle is that green zone. And we call that like the window of tolerance. So that's how much can you tolerate before you either go up in energy or you go down in energy. Are you a
Oh,
person that's more
mhm.
likely to become like frustrated, angry, outward emotion, or are you a person who just goes inward and like shrinks down and
Mm,
internalizes?
right.
So, window tolerance is the green zone. It's where you're focused, it's where you're happy, it's where you're ready to listen and learn.
Mhm.
That's where we want to be. That's where we're
Right.
aiming to be. But when something in your environment or internal in your body kind of triggers you or sets you off, you leave that window of tolerance. And you
Mm,
might be a person again that's more prone to going up in energy. So you might go up into the top box, or you might be a person who's more likely to go internal and you kind of go down into that bottom box. You're
yeah, that makes
and
sense.
you could be a person that goes into both. Sometimes
Hmm,
you are a person who does go into the top, but sometimes you fall into the bottom. Like, I almost think
hmm,
about it as like someone going into the top box is like a more anxious prone person versus like
right.
someone that goes in the bottom box is a more depressive prone person.
Right. That makes sense.
I can feel anxiety and depression. I might be anxious more often, so I might be a person who's going to go up more
Mhm.
regularly. But if I really, really, really feel overwhelmed, it might even put me in a state of depression, like to where I feel like I just can't even get out.
Yeah.
So when I think about that and like the spectrum of color, again, that middle like healthy zone is the green. When I leave and go up, that's like your yellow and your red zone.
Mhm.
It's almost like your yellow is like where you hit the upper tier first, and the red is like, oh, I'm like really far up in that box
Right.
now. Versus your blue is like down. I'm going down. So the color system aligns perfectly to how we leave our zones in our nervous system and how we regulate and are dysregulated. You either go up, you go down. But the goal is always recognize when you've left that middle box, recognize when you've left that window of tolerance and you've
Mm.
gone up or gone down, and then do something to get back as quickly as possible. The sooner you get back, the better you feel, but the more regulated you stay.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some strategies that parents can, well, I'm assuming it's pretty easy to tell when a child is out of regulation.
Yeah, especially as a parent, I think
Yeah.
you recognize pretty quickly, like, that's not their normal or yeah.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Not how they respond to that, or yeah, like you're saying, we're gonna go out, like their favorite place, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden it's just not the same.
yeah.
Yeah, but so what can parents do then to help a child who has either gone too high or too
Mhm,
low? And
mhm,
are they different or are they the same as far as techniques or strategies to use?
yeah. Um, Lots of different things. I mean, I think in opposites. So if a child goes up out of the window of tolerance into the upper tier, I wanna do something to bring their energy back down. But if they are really high, like, I could also use something that is kind of higher energy to exhaust them. So there is, like, the idea of, like,
Oh,
oh,
yes,
like,
I have heard of
exercise,
that.
movement, like, that's definitely not
Right.
gonna that's not, like, a down regulating thing, but it is if you do it long enough. It is if it
Hmm.
exhausts you. So, for the most part, I would say opposites, like, I would do something that calms them down, but I do think about too, like, can I use something to, like, an exhaustive point that's gonna help them, like, movement is helpful, it's healthy.
Right.
So, for doing that could regulate them too.
Yeah.
If they're more likely to fall down in the bottom side of things, I typically want to do something to bring their energy back up. So I usually
Mhm.
am doing something that's kind of more like upper. But you could do it, it's a little bit of trial and error. It's like,
Mhm.
does that upper really bring that person up or not? Do they
Right.
need something that is more neutralized or kind of lower energy? I
Mhm.
do a little bit of trial and error to see how students and how individual kids respond to different interventions. But I basically introduce them when they're inside that window of tolerance. I introduce them to lots of different strategies. So I do breath work. We do like rhythmic work, so like that walking,
Mm.
that swinging. We
Mhm.
do like cross body like
Yeah.
work. Um,
Mhm.
we'll even do like organizing, cleaning, sorting. Because if your internal world is
Ah.
all disorganized, if I
Mm.
externally organize, it's going to internally organize me. Like my mind is going to reflect
Yes.
the action I'm doing. So I might do that. But it could be something as simple as like water exposure, like drinking water,
Mm.
hearing water, seeing water, touching water. Like water is very soothing, very calming. It could
Yeah.
be a step outside and just getting some fresh air, whether it's hot air, cold air, whatever, just a boost of fresh air can just reset you
Mm.
back down. Um, I do a lot of progressive muscle relaxation, which is like a big term for we just tense up our muscles really tight. We hold that tension and then we
Right.
release. So, like a really simple one that I'm teaching my 15-month-old right now because he's starting to get to the age where when you take something away from him, we're
Uh-huh.
entering into that tension stage. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
okay, it's okay to be angry. We gotta teach you the right way to be angry because tossing this banana across the table is not gonna work
Right.
for me. So, like, in doing that, I won't necessarily, like, explain to him why we're
Right.
doing
No.
the terms. I'm just modeling for him. So I'm like, "Okay,
Yes.
when you're angry," I'm like, "We can squeeze lemons," and we just squeeze our hands really, really tight, and I go, "Ugh," I squeeze, and I hold it, and then I let go. For older kids, you might squeeze and hold it for, like, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then you might do it again and squeeze and hold again, but I'm isolating a part of my body with muscles,
Right.
and I'm
Yep.
tensing up those muscles, and I'm holding them, and then I'm letting go. I mean, you could do it with, like, your jaw, like, pretend you're biting a carrot, like, and then let go.
Your
And then
dentist might not like that, but yes.
your dentist probably would not. Maybe bite on something that is maybe between your teeth.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, any part of your
yeah,
body, your abdominal, your feet, your glutes,
right.
anything can be kind of isolated, squeezed, hold tight, let go.
Okay. So is it right in saying that the nervous system is kind of the precursor to the emotional regulation?
Yeah, I
So if
think
your
so.
nervous
Yeah.
system all in alignment through
Mhm.
some sort of technique that the emotion
Mhm.
that's coming out is going to
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all connected. So if you can get
Mhm.
your nervous system back into it, like orientation and neutralized, your emotional system is gonna be like, okay, my nervous system said it's all okay here and I can calm down. So
Right.
my emotional brain can let go and shut off and my logic can come back online again.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all interconnected body systems. And if you can do an act that tells
Mhm.
your nervous system it's okay, come back down, then your nervous system communicates with other systems, and then your body just all collectively re-enters like an
Right.
equilibrium state.
Yeah. Can we touch a little bit on trauma?
Yeah.
Because I know trauma affects the nervous system, and then, of course, emotions sometimes hijack a child that has
Mhm.
had a traumatic experience. And I know a lot of people in our community have kids that are either
Mhm.
adopted or have been through some kind of trauma that led to them to homeschool, whether it was medical trauma. I know we have a
Mhm.
lot of questions usually about that. Um, or other things
Mhm.
through a disability and services they have had that just did not serve them well. So, how does that affect the nervous system? And what can parents expect when they start working with these things if a child has some trauma background?
Yeah. And just before we bump into this category,
Yeah.
the steps to this like emotional regulations, like
Mhm.
categorization, possibly create a calm zone, teach a toolbox of tools, teach coping strategies.
Right.
Step 4 I didn't go into, but I think we're gonna maybe bring that back up with possibly one of the questions later. It's basically just problem solving. You are solving a problem around regulations. The next time it comes up, they're already kind
Mhm.
of pre-wired about what to do. So we're not just kind of like regulating and moving on. We're also talking
Right.
about it so that when it comes up again, we know what to do. We're kind of pre-planning to prevent it from happening. So that's the big one
Yeah.
that's going to prevent the same
Well, and I
behavior from
think too, the more that we normalize those types of things in our
Mhm.
homes with our
Yeah.
kids and have
Yep.
those conversations, the
Yeah.
more that they're willing to share when they get into those spaces than
Yep.
saying, oh, well, as they get older, they just internalize everything. And then
Mhm.
we see these behaviors come out that we don't even know where they're coming from.
Right.
But if we start
Exactly.
to have those conversations, then your child, as they get older and even through the process of
Mhm.
getting to this place, they're going to be more open to saying, "Oh, they're my coach, they're on my team," and
Yep.
I'm going to be
Exactly.
more open about that.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And going into the trauma informed, we have a viewer that just said that she's kind of there. She said my son was assaulted by a substitute teacher when he wasn't, which is why they're homeschooling now. So yeah, lots of experiences out there, unfortunately. But
Yeah, I mean, I think even not I think I know data even collected on traumatic experiences, like how many people in the US alone, but then, worldwide have experienced an event of trauma or what qualifies as trauma, and then how many people have experienced multiple traumatic events, like the numbers are high. I think it's like and this is data that's reported, so then you've got all the data that's not even
right, it's
reported.
not
So I think
reported.
it's above
Mhm.
70% right now, people in the US that have
Wow.
experienced at least one traumatic event.
Hmm.
A lot of the numbers are pretty high for, like, people that have experienced at least 3 or more, 4 or more.
Wow.
So, it's not uncommon anymore, which is
Hmm.
unfortunate,
Right.
mm, but you can correct it. So you think about trauma in the nervous system is, like, when you are chronically and regularly experiencing things that take you out of that window of tolerance,
Mhm.
they either take you up or they take you down. When it keeps happening, it makes it strengthens those muscles below or above, and the
Yeah.
muscle in
Mhm.
the window tolerance shrinks. So chronic exposure to stress is gonna do that. Traumatic exposure is kind of the same, except it's just like one big hit. So you've
Right.
left the window of tolerance
Hmm.
and you've gone up, or maybe you've gone down, and you kind of just get lodged in that upper or lower tier and you get kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And it's almost like an expedited growth of being stuck in that state versus
Mhm.
like chronic stress would just keep bumping you back and then back and then back and then back. And that's how that grows. So trauma just
Okay.
really gets you kind of lodged and stuck there. So that said, like it's just as hard, if not harder, to work on the things to get you back into the window of tolerance, to get you back into the green zone. The more you do those things, the more the child's going to be able to come out of that upper or lower tier, that like traumatic, traumatized state.
Right.
But because that was such a big event and such like
Yeah.
a overwhelming body event, it's going to take a lot of exposures to this work and a lot of using of the tools repeatedly, both reactively and preventatively, to them to feel safe again, to be able to come back into their window of tolerance.
Absolutely. So yeah, that
So
makes a lot of sense. And so just to have that patience and perseverance with that child to continue to work through that. And I guess it depends on the event, how much it affected that
yeah,
child, just the ingrown um, just state that they're
yeah,
in, and
yeah,
how much it's going to take to reorient that. And so it must
yeah.
every person's different, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
As
and that's
to
what's hard about trauma is like one thing that's traumatic to one person may or could not be as traumatic to another person, which is kind of almost strange to think about. But then also you have to bring in the factor of like everyone's got a different level of resiliency based on many factors,
right.
because practiced resiliency, because of genetics, because of environment.
Hmm.
So two people might have the same like traumatic event happen to them, but one responds very differently than the other because of their like inborn or created resiliency system. So there's
Right.
that level of things. And if you're talking like foster care and adoption, then there's like, well, what not even necessarily traumatic events, but like what happened in utero and what happened genetically before even utero. So then you've got like the
Right.
layers of there's the genes
Hmm.
and there's like what we call the epigenome. So like there's this
Right.
other factor of like, well, the genes can change and they can change when the baby's in utero and developing. In fact, there's like a lot happening in utero and in
Yeah.
development. So when there are stressors that the mom experiences,
Hmm.
the baby experiences them, that alters the baby's ability to regulate their nervous system because and their
Mm,
emotional system
back to
because
that.
they were
Yes.
developed in a state of stress. So naturally they're born with like some bit of a elevated state of stress.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have 10 adopted siblings. So my family has lived through a lot of that.
Yeah,
And it's amazing, even, sibling groups that
yeah,
my parents
yeah,
adopted
different.
would be different just
Yeah,
because of the way they just respond to stress, and they
yeah,
went through the exact same environment.
yeah,
It's just it's very interesting, but
yeah,
yet, like you said, it's just that matter of walking with them and giving them the tools, and it's a
yeah,
matter of time that.
yeah. I mean, I have a family member that has a 5 and yeah, I think now probably like 7 and 5 or 7 and 4, but 2 boys, extremely different,
Hmm.
and some of it's personality, of course, but she had asked
Right.
me, like, "Why was my first, like, so chill, so calm, like, very emotionally sensitive, and my second one is, like, doing backflips off the back porch?" Like,
Right.
I don't get it, like, I don't what did I do wrong? And I was I asked some questions about, like, we know, like, your genetics, and we know your husband's genetics, and but
Hmm.
what was the experience for you like, while you were pregnant, like, while they were in utero? Like, was it the same? Was it
Ah,
similar?
yeah.
And she said, "No, actually, I had switched jobs before I had gotten pregnant with the second. My job was very stressful, and there were
Oh,
some
wow.
the older brother at that point had developed an autoimmune disorder, so they were in the hospital a lot with the older brother while the second one
Yeah.
was in utero. So there are all these things that were like very high stressors that she had experienced almost the entire length of pregnancy for the second. And I said, I think that has a lot to do why he's struggling with emotional regulation. And the reality of this is you couldn't have changed any of that. Maybe you
Right.
could have like done something about the job, possibly, but you got to
Hmm.
work for a living, and you can't help the fact that you're in the hospital all the time with your firstborn. Like that
Right.
is
No.
completely out of your control.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. But it's amazing just how much our nervous systems affect our kids. And, even after they're born,
yeah.
just they mirror. You were talking about that earlier.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and just as parents,
Yeah.
how we can be, I guess, more attentive
Mhm.
to what we're doing, and mirroring what we want to our children to see and do.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. And we have these mirror neurons in our brain, and we kind of mimic the environment or the actions or the people. It's why there's I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, "You are like the 5 people you spend the most time with." That makes perfect
Uh,
sense. Their
yeah,
actions, their behaviors, you are subconsciously mirroring what they're doing, whether it's good or bad, whether
yeah,
you want to or not. Like, it's just a subconscious thing we do. And so naturally, like in a home or even a school, like you'll especially with young kids too, like before they've got the more advanced thinking developed, like they say the things you say, they literally do the exact things you do. Um, and we have to
yeah,
be very careful at that stage because they're picking up everything that we're doing.
absolutely.
I tell people, your outer voice becomes a child's inner voice. So your outward actions, your
Wow,
outward
that's
words become a child's inner words, and then start the actions that they then bring outward. So whatever you're doing outwardly in front of them, that's what they're internalizing, and that's what's going to come back up and come back out for them. So
right.
if we're like, I think about even now, 15-month-old, like we're, starting to do some things where I'm hearing caregivers say like, no, no, no.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm not loving that response. Let me share
Right.
why that is. Because if he keeps hearing you say no, what is he gonna learn? He's gonna learn to start telling you no. So
Mhm.
a better response might be to guide him on what he can do instead. He's kind of too young to learn why he can't be doing that because he doesn't have
Right.
that much logic and reason yet, but we can guide him to something he can do instead of always just saying no. Because the last thing I want to teach him is that he can just say no to everyone all the
Right.
time. Same kind of thing.
That just leads to a whole lot other behavior.
Right. So I think it is more important for us to learn to regulate first than to teach our kids regulation. If you want your child to come out of an elevated state, you must first bring yourself out of it if you are
Right.
elevated or keep yourself from going into it. Because if their energy is up and you go up with them, it's just going to keep everyone up. But if their energy goes up and you bring yours down, they're going to follow you back down. And it's
Absolutely.
hard. I get
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's stressful. We're tired. We've got 17,000 things in our minds. We're like, I want them to
Right.
regulate, so I gotta regulate. It's like, it's it's not easy to do. So give
Yeah.
yourself some grace.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
someone who's well versed in it, and I still struggle some days. I'm like,
Yeah.
"No." I'm like, "Oh, I said no."
Absolutely. So it goes back to us having our own toolbox,
Mhm,
which you were talking about earlier, I
mhm.
think, and knowing how to get ourselves out of those states because
Yeah.
we do
Yes.
get into them. And
Yeah.
again, quoting you from the beginning is it doesn't make us bad. It's
Right.
just
No,
those are the
no,
things that
no.
as humans, we have emotions,
Yeah.
and we just have to know how to not react on those emotions. We
Yep.
instead how to just regulate them
Yeah.
and bring ourselves
Yep.
back into a place where we can logically think
Yep.
because there is no amount of logic usually when you hit the extent
Correct.
of those zones.
Correct. Yeah, we're not born with, like, the ability to regulate emotions, like, that's just not something that we naturally do well. To some extent, we
Mhm.
can do it a little bit naturally, but it's more of a learned skill. So if you were raised in a family system or a family environment where those skills weren't modeled or
Right.
explicitly taught, naturally, you develop into an adult who may not be strong in that area, and that's not really your fault. I mean, yes, you can
Right.
do some work to
Yeah.
improve it, but if you're an adult now raising kids and you're like, "Oh, I'm struggling to regulate," give yourself some grace because you didn't have the tool set from your early childhood yourself. So
Right.
now you're having to learn it as an adult, and
Mhm.
that's not easy either.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of leads us into just respectful communication.
Mhm,
Just being able to communicate with our children and other people
mhm,
around us, teaching our children how
mhm.
to communicate. What can we do to just help facilitate those discussions in a way that is understanding that we all fail. We
Mhm,
all are
mhm.
working on this in a loving and respectful way.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk about problem solving a little bit here, but before I talk about problem
Yeah.
solving, I just wanna there's some good resources, like, for communication specifically, like, Wendy Mogul writes a book called
Oh,
Voice Lessons.
okay.
Um, I believe
I'll
his
put
name
a
is
link to
pronounced
that in,
yeah, Wendy
the show
Mogul.
notes.
Another really good communication person, I think it's Heimgnott, Haimginnott. And they both talk a lot about really shifting the way that we communicate with kids, because they share like the data of like
Hmm.
80 or 90% is very like authoritarian communication. Like we're always directing
yeah.
kids and we're always telling them what to do. Imagine going around your whole day and someone's just constantly telling you what to and not to
Right.
do. You feel like you have no freedom, you have no control, you have
That
no
would
like
just put you out of the green zone right there.
right. And it does. And it does. Think about the way we
Right.
communicate. Do this, stop doing this. And it's just constantly taking you out of your window of tolerance. It's constantly out of your green zone. Yes. I mean, that would take me out.
Yeah.
So they give these authors and yet there are many others as well, give these strategies that we can use with kids that communicate in a way that like give kids the power and control, but still get them to do the things you want them to do. So like here's a really, really, really simple, easy one is when I have a child and I want them to do something, instead of saying like, you need to go do whatever or go clean this up,
Mhm.
instead of saying you need to or go do this, I would instead state what I see. And when I state what I see, instead of telling them what to do, I'm
Right.
basically saying I have a problem for them to solve. I'm saying, I see this thing.
Mhm.
I'm gonna tell you about it. I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna give you a chance to respond and react to what I see. Because what I'm telling you is this needs to be fixed. I'm not
Right.
telling you to do it right now. I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm not taking away your power and control. I'm
Right.
setting up a problem for you to solve how you would like to solve it. I'm just telling you the problem is here and it exists. So like if I give you an example of like super simple, like let's say the table is just like littered with papers and notebooks and stuff, and we're getting ready to have dinner and we need to clear off the table. I can
Right.
say like so-and-so or kids or whoever, like go pick up your stuff. You need to clean up your stuff. Like that's taking away all their control. Or I
Right.
can say, I see a kitchen table that's full of papers and pencils.
Right.
Pause, wait, give them a chance to respond, hear that, process it, think of a
Mhm.
solution, and then act on it. Where I'll see people
Right.
goof on this is like they'll say, well, I see Legos that need to be picked up. And if the child doesn't respond in 10 seconds, or like, see, it didn't work. I'm like, they haven't even processed the problem that you
No.
just posed
Yes.
yet. Like they have to process the
Exactly.
problem, come up with a solution, and act. Give them some time to do it.
Mhm.
And if they don't respond, then you might need to follow up with something else. But I'm
Right.
trying to be more intentional about not telling my kids all the time what to do, but
Right.
instead give them information, set up problems for them to solve, let them have ownership and responsibility over how
Yeah.
some of those things are done.
Yeah. Because a lot of times they don't even notice those things.
Right.
And they're
100%.
just it's out of their field of thought, they've got
100%.
focused on other stuff, and
Yep.
we I guess we assume a lot of times that our kids have the same vision of things and how
Mhm.
they what
Mhm.
things look like, and they just don't.
Yeah.
They got their little minds wrapped around other things, and I
Yep.
found that true with schedules too. My
Mhm.
my kids woke up in the morning with a schedule on their mind of what they wanted to do, and with mine conflicted, that's when we had major meltdowns.
Mhm.
And so if
Mhm.
I, like, was able to go through, "This is what we're gonna do this week
Yeah.
and this next day," and we were at the same place, we didn't have that,
Yep.
but I had to point out, that this is how I see it, and
Mhm.
now how are you gonna get yourself so that we can all be in the same place together?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And that's probably the strategy I use the most. The 4th step of this, like, emotional regulation framework is problem solving.
Mhm.
And it's, like, a very intentional but very short process that I go through. Not every time there's a problem, but as often and regularly and frequently as I can. So it's really simple. It's you felt, I felt, problem, solution. So I start with describing how I think they felt because I wanna validate them and get them back into their window of tolerance first.
Right.
Then I state how I felt because now I want them to develop empathy about how they made me feel. So
Oh,
you could say, I
absolutely.
think you were feeling. Meanwhile, I was feeling,
Mhm.
and it's just straight to the problem. The problem is, and then invite them to come up with some solutions. Can you help me come up with some ideas for how to do this differently next time? And what I
Right.
do in this very brief conversation, I don't elaborate, I don't go into detail, I don't add all this stuff. I'm just
Mhm.
like, you were feeling, at least I think you were feeling this way. I was definitely feeling this way. Here's the
Mhm.
problem. Let's come up with some solutions. And I write them down. And then we agree on one solution together. And then I keep that paper, note, my phone, whatever, because if the solution does not work next time, I want to make sure I have that list to go back to choose another one, or I can keep adding to that.
Yes.
So I never just like
Right.
have the conversation and bolt unless I'm
Mhm.
in the community in public and I don't have a chance to write it down. But
Yeah.
I think like this works for so many problems. Like,
Right.
a child that keeps escaping the group, doesn't want to come be a part of the group, I'm like, I go through those steps. I think you were feeling
Mhm.
bored, frustrated, whatever, insert emotion.
Right.
I was feeling a little bit maybe disrespected because you left. Maybe I felt like curious, whatever I felt. The
Right.
problem is when we're learning and you leave, you miss the learning.
Right.
So I'm wondering, can you help me come up with some ideas to help you stay for the learning and
Right.
invite them to come up with some ideas? And I might learn about a lot about why they are leaving
Why?
versus what I
Right.
think is why they have left. And we
Mhm.
come up with some solutions. They have ownership. They have control. They might even come up with a great idea and often do. We choose it. We use it. We go on. Problem solved.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good because yeah, it's so easy. And I think it's just kind of maybe how most of us were raised is
Yeah.
just do this. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't
100%.
about let's come to an understanding. Let's be
Yeah.
respectful.
Yeah.
And you know, the, I don't know. I've never been a proponent for telling my kids what to do because
Mhm.
I feel, I will become enemy number one. And that's the last thing
Sure.
because the relationship with our children, and especially as a homeschooler, it's so core and essential to our child's learning, to
Right.
everything that we're
Right.
doing.
Right.
And because if they don't respect you, they don't learn from you.
Right.
They're
Right.
gonna say, "Oh, whatever she's saying,
Yep.
I'll go learn from somebody else."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's really important to be on the same page and to come to that mutual understanding. So
Yeah.
that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we had a couple questions come in from viewers previous
Yeah.
to the discussion, and I want to pick those. Sorry, my screen is going on and off. So if I'm looking over to the side, I have to look at my secondary screen here. But we had one mom with a teen, and she said, "My challenge is with," and she was saying it was like a 13-year-old daughter, not listening or following consequences for behavior that we see as dangerous. When we give her boundaries, she gets incredibly defiant. Please help.
Yeah, this is a perfect situation where I would implement that problem-solving conversation because I'm, like, looking
Mm,
at this, I'm like, "Okay, you're issuing consequences, taking away control. Okay, you're
right,
setting boundaries." My guess is I don't know for sure, but maybe you set the boundaries for her. She wasn't included in the boundary setting, so taking away
right.
control again, so you've got a double dose of taking away control for an
Hmm.
age group of a child who does not like their control taken away. Teens trying to take away their control at
Right.
all. Like, look at them the wrong way, like you're taking away their control, and it's like
Exactly.
triggers them to leave their green zone, so you have to be mindful of, like, your age group and then some of the strategies that you're using. So for me, like, I want my child to, 1, know I trust him or her, and by doing so, I'm gonna work with them to set boundaries. Like, I'm gonna have a problem-solving conversation, say, like, "I'd like to hear what you think is an appropriate boundary. I'd like to hear why you think that's inappropriate. I'd like to hear why you think my boundary is not appropriate." And I
Hmm.
actually hear them. And then 2, I'm thinking about, like, I wanna go through those problem-solving steps. Like, when you do this behavior, you're likely feeling this way. I am
Mm,
feeling real scared. I am feeling terrified. The
yeah.
problem is, like, that is incredibly dangerous, and I am concerned you will get hurt.
Hmm.
Again, how I feel, like, I'm really emphasizing here that this danger thing is making me freak out a little bit.
Right. Yes.
Can you come up with some ideas with me where we can meet in the middle, where we can both get what we want? Like, let's come up with some situations or scenarios or boundaries or consequences. And I might even ask a child to, like, come up with and help me come up with, like, what are consequences if you don't follow up with this? Like, what do you feel like
Oh,
is a fair
yeah.
consequence? We're so
Mm,
quick to be like, phone's gone, you're grounded. Versus I'm like, I would love to hear from you. What do you think is an appropriate consequence here? What do you
yeah.
think is appropriate? What would you do if you were your mom or dad
Right.
or whatever?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's just so much open communication because I want to this particular she wants to go do whatever it is she wants to do. I want to
Mhm.
understand why. I genuinely want to understand why. And when she's upset because I say no, I want to validate her because that is her feeling. Like whether I agree or
Right.
don't agree, I don't have to agree to validate her. But I'm going to
Mhm.
say, I hear you and I understand. Why do I care about all of this? Because
Right.
underneath all of this, I want to develop a relationship with her that's trust and safety. I want her to feel safe with me. I want her to trust me. I want to trust her. If I'm
Right.
just issuing
Yeah.
consequences and throwing out boundaries, that's not developing safety or trust. It's saying, I don't trust you. It's saying, I have control of you. I will keep control of you. And
Mhm.
our relationship is going to be muddled because of
Yeah,
my
and
desire
just
to,
continue to
yeah,
be in that situation, just continue to create a greater and greater divide over time.
right,
Um, yeah, it's hard to restore,
yeah,
which
it
is,
is.
what you want. Yeah, I love
One of
that,
those,
and
oh,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, often I would say I'm passing the pain onto my child, and because they don't
Yeah,
feel the pain that you feel,
right,
and so we try
right.
to pass that on through consequences, like, "I'm gonna make you feel my pain," but by sharing what's the conflict that you're going through is a
Mhm.
greater pain, actually,
Yeah,
because they're realizing that actions that they're choosing to take is causing that rift. It's
yeah,
not, you just trying to keep the letter of the law in your house.
yeah,
Um, and so they see an active involvement in that.
mhm,
And so that's, yeah, really, really powerful way to
yeah,
parent
yep,
too. And loving and respectful at the same time.
yep. And
Yeah.
I will say when you do this conversation the first time, it's probably gonna be a little awkward and not go incredibly well because they're gonna be like, "What? Like,
Yeah.
you don't talk to me like this, or you don't like, who are you?" Like, the response is usually not great, and that's okay. You just
Yep.
say, "What we've been doing hasn't been working. I wanna try something new. So we're gonna try something
Yes.
new." And it may not go
Absolutely.
very well the first time. That's okay. Don't give up on it. Try it again. Try it again. Try it again.
Good to
If you're
know.
really struggling, try and distract them with something, like play a game or something where their hands are a little bit distracted so their mind can be free. But don't give up on it just because the first time doesn't
Yeah.
go well.
Yeah. That's good advice. Because yes, that is often change is hard. It's change for all of
Mhm.
us. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we had a question also about tips for motivating. Do you have any quick things to share? I know we've had a couple conversations recently on our show about 5 tips for increasing student behavior,
Mhm.
and we covered executive functioning, which usually leads to a lot of behavior issues and motivation too in school. And so we've approached it from a couple different ways, but I just would love to know what you have to add as far as strategies for
Yeah.
a parent who finds their child is not motivated.
I think my mind goes to first, like, before I'm even thinking about how to motivate them, I'm thinking about what's demotivating them. Like,
Ah,
is,
that's
like,
good.
my way or
Mhm.
approach that I'm trying to motivate them or, like, is anything there demotivating them? I'm trying to think of, like,
Right.
common sources of demotivation or, like, perceived even if it's not a real threat, like a perceived threat, like something that you say or a consequence you issue or something like, "If you don't, then this will happen," or "I will do this." Like, that's very demotivating. It's perceived as, like,
Mhm.
an internal threat. So that's
Yeah.
definitely a big demotivator. There could be, like, just feeling lack of respect, like, if a child feels a
Mm.
lack of respect from anyone or an adult, like, then they lose a
Right.
lot of motivation to do the things that that adult wants them to do, or,
Yeah.
you've got stress in life too, like, that's
Mhm.
gonna demotivate you, so there are lots of things that would demotivate kids, so I think trying to get maybe to some of those root causes to
Right.
remove the demotivation, and they might not need to be motivated, but
Exactly, yeah. I know we've addressed this, and, there's a lot of times parents will come in with this picture perfect idea of what homeschooling should look like,
Mhm,
and they don't
mhm,
include any of the interests of their child at
mhm,
all,
mhm,
and
yep,
that is it just disrespects the child.
yeah,
Because
yep,
this is their education,
yep,
and I think if, we can get around that, and I told this to one parent, we had coffee, and she's like, "I'm ready to give up. My child is resisting me. She's not
yep,
motivated to do any school.
yep,
All we do is battle all day." And I
uh-huh,
said, "We'll put it in her hands." And
yeah.
she came back, like, the next week, and she goes, "Look at all this stuff we're doing, and she's asking to learn more." And I was like, "Yep."
Yeah,
You just came from her
100%.
point of view instead of yours.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
huge, just huge.
Yeah. I think if I'm giving, like, a 3 like, top 3 motivators I use or teach people to use, like, in our brain-based design is, like, get kids in the right emotional state. If they're, like, in a slouched over, like, not awake, not alert,
Right.
they're not in the green zone. If they're in that blue zone and they're just not in a state ready to learn, I'm not gonna start trying to learn. I'm gonna or teach or, any of that. I'm gonna get them in the right state. So my first motivational thing is, like, get kids in the right state.
Yeah.
Second thing is, like, novelty is really helpful. So can you bring in novelty, a new way of doing things, a new way of presenting? Like,
Mhm.
when we had this whole pandemic thing and everyone was teaching online, a lot of
Right.
kids lost, like, attendance. There was no accountability, like, but so I remember one teacher put on, like, one of those blow up dino suits, and
Oh.
he taught on the screen with a and I was like, "Oh my gosh, novelty, like, what
Right.
Oh, what a smart way to get kids motivated to come online
Mhm.
to see him, to learn. That was good.
Yeah.
So emotional states, novelty, and I would say like 2 more, movement and choice, like, get them moving, like, throughout just don't have them sit in chair and learn or sit in a seat and learn, like, get them moving to different places, movement gets blood flowing, oxygen to the brain, we think more clearly, and then choice,
Yes.
freedom of choice around, just gives kids a lot more motivation, so choice,
Yeah.
movement, novelty, emotional states.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that answers really this last question Jenny had asked too about how do I help my child with learning disabilities have a good attitude about trying her best to learn. I think that just copies that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
same thing.
and you could this is a great brainstorming conversation too, is like, I think you are feeling defeated.
Kind of problem
I am
solving.
feeling like I'm feeling sad with you, and
Right.
I really want
Yeah.
you to do well. And the problem is we have to, f be excited about learning in order to learn well. So can you help me come up with some ideas that'll help you feel
Yeah.
better about learning or, be more
Mhm.
depends on you, be more motivated, whatever it is, language I'm gonna use, and then we collectively come up with some solutions. But
Yeah.
there's some other things too, like, I mean, one, a child with learning disabilities, like, their brain is, like, not neurally set up as the other. So it is more
Yeah.
challenging. So if you can like
Mhm.
validate them and be like, I hear you. It is hard and it is
Yes.
harder
Yeah.
for you. And I
Mhm.
understand that. Like medically, it's harder for you.
Yeah.
And I really
And
want to help you. It's like,
yeah.
help me help you. And
Mhm.
then praise, positive affirmations, like speaking kind words. Like I know those things sound a little like woo woo and like, yeah, yeah. But
But
when your
no, no, they
brain
go a
sees
long way.
them and when they hear them, it changes your neural makeup. And for someone who's
Yeah.
already got a neural makeup against them for learning, if you
Yeah.
can do things to improve that neural makeup, it's going to get easier.
Yeah, yeah. I had many of those discussions. My oldest was diagnosed on the spectrum, and we, talked about just, emotional regulation and his
Mhm,
anger and
mhm,
said, this is something that you are struggling with and you
yeah,
probably will struggle with more than other people.
mhm.
But then we put it on the other side. But your ability to do tasks with nothing distracting you and that is, you've got everybody beat.
Yeah,
And you turn it into what are the positives coming out of this too? Don't just look at the negatives.
yeah.
And there's always something. So study your student. Definitely learn what those are. So I would love you to talk a little bit about your website, the Behavior Hub, and what families can find there,
Mhm,
so that they know how to connect with you and
yeah.
to get more of your information.
Happy to. So on the Behavior Hub, I think that the best places to go are there's a podcast page and there's a blog page, and it's just free, very short resources. Like most podcast episodes are under 20 minutes, most around 10, 15, but they
Mhm.
go into all these categories like emotional regulation, nervous system, like
Yeah.
what's underneath the behavior, how do we motivate our students, like all
Yeah.
of that's in there for you. And it's a great resource. And as far as like the work I do outside of like putting up those free resources, it's like and if it's a good fit, I will work with schools, I will work with families and do
Mhm.
like short-term coaching to help them learn some of these things and make them habits and get to where they want to get to on a short-term basis.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And so if you're listening, it's thebehaviorhub.com. Of course, you see it on the screen if you're watching. And I'll have all of the links specifically to the podcast and the blog in the notes on both of those resources so that you can just click on them instead of trying to figure out the URLs. So it's always easier that way. And thank you so much, Lauren. This has been such an insightful conversation and really a good wrap up to our discussion this month on behaviors and of course challenging behaviors. They just kind of throw us for a loop, but I think you did a really good job of helping us to understand and really look at it from a much more doable
Mhm.
perspective as far as parenting goes
Yeah.
versus this vague unknown that we
Mhm.
sometimes look at behavior as. It's like, where
Yep.
do I even start?
Yep. Yep.
So yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure, and, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely check out thebehaviorhub.com. And this wraps up our month of talking on behavior. But we would love for you to join us again on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. We're going to be headed into the next month on different ways you can extend out your learning. And we're going to start our next episode by talking about ways to include grandparents in at-home learning. Some of you even have grandparents who are living in your home. How do you get them involved? I know that that's a big struggle. Lots of families now have taken in parents, and a lot of them have suffered strokes. And sometimes I've even heard families that, they're teaching their parents while they're teaching their kids, and working on lots of different things in their home. So we're going to cover that topic on our next episode. So you'll want to join us then. Thanks again, Lauren. Appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us. We will see you again for our next episode right here. And until then, God bless and take care, everybody. We'll see you then.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool. Go to spedhomeschool.com to get resources and support for teaching your unique learner at home.